Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Council of Councils 13th Regional Conference public session on Indonesia's G20 and ASEAN chairmanship. What to expect from the upcoming summits. My name is Wafa Karisma, and it is my honor to be your host for today's event. This event is a collaboration between the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS Indonesia, and Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, in the United States. The forum today is designed to facilitate a discussion between distinguished experts as we head towards what will be a very interesting period for Indonesia's global and regional leadership, the G20 and the ASEAN Summit. And as you know, it has been a very unpredictable past few years with all the major developments since the pandemic arrives. And Indonesia has found itself in a very interesting but very important time to hold both the G20 presidency this year and ASEAN chairmanship next year. And it would not be right for me not to warmly greet and recognize some of the key figures around the room. May I please welcome Professor Jusman Simanjuntak, the chair of the board of directors in CSI Indonesia and rector of the Prasetya Mulia University Indonesia. And also welcome Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, the executive director of CSIS Indonesia, as will be introduced by Pak Tama Salim as well. Both of these figures are the co-chairs of the T20 Indonesia. And may I also please say my warm greeting to Dr. James M. Lindsay, Senior Vice President of the Director of Studies, and Maurice R. Greenberg, Chair at the Council on Foreign Relations. Of course, I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers and chair, as well as the prominent guests who have attended today. We have a room full of fantastic figures since yesterday, and the list will be endless. So apologies for if I keep it short for this very short public session that we have today. But we will now proceed to the main bulk of the discussion, the next agenda, the panel session. The next session will be chaired by Mr. Tama Salim, the Deputy Managing Editor at the Jakarta Post. May I please warmly welcome you, Pak Tama, to the stage, and you can introduce the other speakers. Pak Tama, the floor is yours.
I hope everyone here is in good graces. So welcome, first of all, to the CSIS meeting as part of the Council of Councils 13th Regional Conference entitled Indonesia's G20 and ASEAN Chairmanship, What to Expect from the Upcoming Summits. I am Tama Salim. I am Deputy Managing Editor of the Jakarta Post, and I will be presiding for this session this morning. I will be sitting in for my mentor and colleague at the Post, Indi Bayuni, who was unable to join. So it is a great pleasure for me to be able to chair this discussion today. Today we have 4 terrific speakers on our panel, and I would like to invite them onto the stage one by one. First of all, we have Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director of the CSIS. Please come to the stage. Dr. Yose is also co-chair of the T20, the Think Tank 20, which is the G20 engagement group that is tasked to canvas, I think, ideas to be recommended to the G20 summit later. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Dr. Michael Fulilove, Executive Director of the Lowy Institute in Australia. So Dr. Fulilove is, well, everyone, I think I'll try to keep it short here, but I think everyone knows how much of a regarded speaker Dr. Fulilove is. He is, has served as director of the Global Issue Program from 2003 to 2012, and was a visiting fellow at Brookings Institution. Next, we have Dr. Xiao Yujun, Director of the Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau Studies Program at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. Welcome, Dr. Xiao. And I'll get right to Professor Jusman Simanjuntak, Rector of Prasetya Mulia University and also co-chair of the T20. Please be our guest. All right, so I will sit down. I think it's much more comfortable this way. I'll just have, we'll go straight into conversation, but I think I'll just have a bit of an opening context. We know that the Bali summit is just 2 weeks away, and it's basically been overshadowed by the Ukraine and Russia war, and has been from February. Indonesia has been working hard and has invested in the success of its presidency. But at stake is, of course, its international reputation. And for President Jokowi himself, it is a personal achievement, especially as a self-made businessman, to be able to preside over the group of the largest economies in the world. The war in Ukraine has undermined the Indonesian motto, recover together, recover stronger. And I think officials have already been resigned to the fact that the summit may not necessarily come out with a consensus, as we have seen in past ministerial meetings, and is likely to be, there would likely be a chairman's statement at the end. We're also going to talk about Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship next year, where I think it would be more at ease, but it is still equally important for Indonesia's global reputation. So I'll just go into a few questions straight away, but before we get things flowing, I'd like to ask Dr. Yose here to catch us up a bit. How far have we come in the G20 presidency?
Okay. Thank you very much for the chance as well to COC and also CFR and CSIS Indonesia for this excellent and timely agenda, actually, and meeting. As we know that the G20 has turned to be a very massive process. It's basically talking about everything's under the sky in G20 Indonesia alone. For example, the discussions has been organized in 13 working groups, plus that's under the SERPA track, plus the other 7 others working group and task forces under finance track. So it's a huge, and somehow it doesn't really have a focus. So Indonesia has been trying a lot to make some kind of directions to keep the focus of G20 discussion this year, and by for example, introducing 3 priority agenda: global health architectures, digital transformations, and energy transition, as well as the post-pandemic macroeconomic strategy. And in that case, Indonesia actually quite successful in directing the discussions to focus the directions into several critical agendas or important agendas. But Indonesia failed actually to introduce new upcoming agenda. When this war started, actually, we had this food security and energy security as new problems, new big major challenges. But Indonesia did not really immediately take the opportunity or to introduce the agenda into G20 discussions. Although, for example, last month there was a joint meeting between finance minister and agriculture minister, but it didn't include trade ministers. Although we know that when we're talking about food security, it's about trade. It's about how each countries restrict the flow of trade for food product. So again, Indonesia failed to come up with a good or to adjust the agenda. And another things, of course, you also mentioned on the geopolitical issues. Indonesia failed to bridge the interests, I think, or not really successful. And like, for example, all those working groups and ministerial meetings did not really come up with a joint statement from the ministers. Normally, joint statements is a normal product of that kind of engagements, but they only come up with a chair statement.
Okay, thank you. I would like to pass the torch to Dr. Fulilove because as we recall in 2014 when Australia was the chair, the president of the G20, similar tensions had arisen. So how is it different this time around? And do you think, what are your minimum expectations from the summit given the kind of the situation that we're in right now?
Thank you. First of all, let me just thank Pak Yose and CFR for hosting us. It's really wonderful to be back in Jakarta after years of COVID. To give you a bit of a sense of my history, when I was a very young man, I worked for Mr. Keating when he was Prime Minister, and I was 22, 23 when Mr. Keating negotiated a security agreement with Indonesia in 1995. So for me, it's always exciting to come back to Jakarta to get a sense of the busyness, the energy, and in particular to visit Jakarta on the cusp of this important chairmanship by your president and your country. Now, having said that, it's hard. It's always hard. It was hard for us in 2014 when we hosted the G20 meeting in Brisbane because Mr. Putin had just invaded Crimea, if I remember correctly. It was good for the Lowy Institute because Angela Merkel decided to give the Lowy lecture that year and to criticize Mr. Putin's moves on that occasion. It's much harder now. International cooperation has stalled completely. Pak Yose mentioned food security, but in the last couple of days, because Russia has suffered some battlefield reverses, it has paused or cancelled the grain deal, which is very bad for the whole world, especially for developing countries. So it's very difficult. These are not the salad days of the G20 as they existed in the time of the global financial crisis. Unfortunately, the world is splintering a little bit, and it's becoming harder to focus, to find the bandwidth to think about these big thematic issues that Pak Yose mentioned, because we're all just trying to get through the crisis that in which we're living. Let me say that I may as well, I should put on the record that I've been highly critical of Russia's illegal, unprovoked, unjustified invasion of Ukraine. And for that, actually, I earned the high honor of being blacklisted by the Russian state. Probably when I hosted President Zelensky recently, at the Institute, that didn't help either.
But having said all that, one thing I'm very glad about is that Prime Minister Albanese signalled a long time ago that he would be attending the G20 meeting regardless of who else attends. I think that's really important. I think it's really important, one, that even when geopolitical tensions are high, that leaders speak to each other, that countries maintain dialogue and communication. This is really incredibly important. And secondly, I think it's important because it was an important Australian acknowledgement of Indonesian leadership and Indonesian diplomacy. Australia.
Shall I begin again? I'm just joking. Australia wants an outward-looking Indonesia. We know that Indonesia naturally has a leadership position within Southeast Asia, and we want to do everything we can do to support that. So I was very pleased that Mr. Albanese indicated, it seems like a long time ago, but at the time it was a live issue, and there was a question mark whether a whole bunch of countries might not come if Mr. Putin came. But notwithstanding my own views of his actions, I think it was really important that Australia made that commitment to come as in part as an acknowledgement of Indonesia's leadership and the value we put on our relationship with Jakarta.
Could you perhaps talk a bit to the potential side meetings we would be expecting at the summit? Is there anything that perhaps Australia, as well as its allies with the US, and these, I guess, touching upon the previous theme yesterday about multilateralism, is there any, do you think it would be a good place to kind of do meetings with the Quad, or let's say AUKUS, or is this the right venue for that?
Look, I think there are other places that my sense is there are probably other places those meetings can take place. I think we had a useful discussion yesterday about AUKUS in the context of minilateral organisations. I don't really see AUKUS as an organisation or really an institution. It's a technology sharing agreement between allies, and that's a very old concept, and we've seen that many times. So I don't think, my own sense is that this would not be the right forum, probably. I think probably there'll be more focus on bilateral meetings. I'm not sure, Pak Yose can tell me about, I presume Presidents Xi and Biden will be speaking. I mean, one bilateral meeting that has not happened for a long time is that between the Australian Prime Minister and the Chinese President. Unfortunately, the Chinese leaders and Chinese ministers have not been willing to speak to their Australian counterparts over the last couple of years. We've been in the diplomatic deep freeze. That has started to thaw a little bit, and we've seen meetings between the Australian and Chinese defence ministers and foreign ministers. At some point, I suspect there will be a meeting between the Australian Prime Minister and the Chinese President. That will be a big deal. I don't know if that will happen at this meeting or somewhere else, but that's an important meeting to take place, I think.
Okay, Dr. Shah, would you like to perhaps jump into that conversation as well? We would really, we're really eager to know the Chinese side of things as well. And I think to add on to that, like, how do you think Indonesia should or could have handled the presidency differently, if at all? And because of, I think, China's interest as well at the G20 here, how do you think it has gone this year?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Chair. And please allow me to thank the two organizers for this public session. I think it gives me the opportunity to engage with the larger community here in Jakarta and also around the world. And because of the COVID, that actually my last overseas visit was in the middle of January 2020. That was to Paris. We had a conference on Afghanistan with American colleagues. So it's been a long time. So it's very good to be here to meet with all the colleagues here. So for this coming G20 summit, I think it's very important because first of all, Indonesia has done an excellent job trying to overcome all those difficulties. We know the situation has been very tough for most of the G20 members. First of all, there were so many issues on the table that need to collaborate among those member countries. No one can deal with those challenges alone. So we need multilateral cooperation. But at the same time, we have those regional military conflicts. The most important one is Ukraine and Russia. So among the G20 members, very huge disputes, different ideas with them. So I think China and I think India also that think those military conflicts should not be the reason to hinder the collaboration and cooperation among G20 members. So we should come back to the original thinking of why should we have multilateral cooperation, right? And we should not use those the global governance issue to be the tool to strengthen certain geostrategic influence. So here we don't need those zero-sum thinking and mindset. So this is the first thing. The second is, I would say this is an Asian moment because it's the first time that an ASEAN member country to host the G20 summit, right? And also we have the other two very important multilateral meetings here will be here in this region. So I think it's important for the world to see that whether Indonesia and other ASEAN member countries and also China, we can put the Asian philosophy, Asian culture into the global governance framework and to make those multilateral mechanisms to really function and deliver. This is a very critical moment for the regional countries to show their political will and the capability. And also for China, I think people are watching very closely about whether we will have the summit between China and the United States alongside the G20 summit. Of course, these major countries' top leaders meeting are always important. Especially right now, China-US relations is in a very tough situation. But in general, I think that we should focus on G20 itself. That's the most important thing. We should not be distracted with those top leaders meeting. The focus should be on G20. Of course, we hope that a little bit improvement of China-US relations will help the G20 mechanism to move forward. Yeah, I will stop.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to move on to Professor Gisman. I think as co-chair of the T20 as well, I would like to ask you whether Indonesia, the government should have changed the agenda at all, or rather than sticking to the recovery agenda, do you think there would have been another way of doing what Indonesia has done this year?
In terms of issue the agenda that Indonesia very enough. Stop making a life of the door. But I think even without a deep discussion from the agenda is already comprehensive enough. And if you compare it to the agenda of G7, you will find all the important things of G7 agenda. The difference now, I think, is that Indonesia more kind of developing public perspective to G20. So the problem of G20 is not in the issue. I think we all share all these important issues facing us, whether it is in regard to recovering from the COVID-20 coordinating our policy as far as possible to allow economies to grow despite tightening in some economies, not some, in major economies. How can we agree on kind of conservative recovery agenda? I think Indonesia indicate how to do that. So, countries where inflation is not very high, to perhaps continue to maintain certain level of integration with the economy. We all need growth. Let's not underestimate the importance of growth. Growth means employment. Employment means alleviation of poverty. And the digital agenda is also, in my view, very important. We have harvested only the very low fruits, the low hanging fruits of digitalization. We are yet to harvest the more substantial fruits of digitalization. And that is when machine can communicate with machine. when machines can aid us in our life. I'm talking about innovation like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and similar development in artificial. But the digital agenda that Indonesia introduces, I think, is also very important. How can we facilitate access of small and medium enterprises to digital innovation, and by doing so, getting them more competitive for national as well as worldwide. And the last agenda, of course, is also very important. It has agenda of Indonesian would like to see production capacity dispersed around the globe, so that in case something happens, in case pandemic strikes, we are all ready to act immediately. They're all very important, I think, of course, the food crisis is no small issue for us. We all need to address it in a satisfactory way. But once again, issue-wise, the problem is this land has no machinery. So it relies on the individual guidance in implementing whatever is agreed upon among the leaders during the event.
Great. Thank you, Professor. So I think we'd like to turn the conversation toward ASEAN. Indonesia is chairing ASEAN next year, and the Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi, she has gone on the record to say that there are a lot of, I think there is overlap between what Indonesia has been championing at the G20 with what is going to be continued in the ASEAN context. So I would like to actually ask our Australian panelists here, because we have a lot of things, I think, kind of contending. The issues are contending with each other next year. What do you think you'd like to see from Indonesia done more at the ASEAN next year?
Look, I guess I would like to see ASEAN grapple with the Myanmar issue. I know this is a very hard issue for ASEAN, but the developments in Myanmar have been a huge blow to democracy with massive human rights implications. Again, I have a personal stake in this because a friend of mine, the Australian professor Sean Turnell, has been imprisoned in Naypyidaw for a long time now because he was close to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. So I have a personal stake in it. Australia has a particular issue, but as a friend of Myanmar and as a visitor to Myanmar and someone who admired the progress that Myanmar had made since the return of democracy, it's such a blow. So I guess that would be the issue that I would nominate.
Does that have an outsized effect on the ASEAN centrality that I think ASEAN has been championing all these years? Will Myanmar become a make or break moment for ASEAN, you think?
No, I wouldn't say make or break, because I think ASEAN has proved its resilience over many years. It's proved its flexibility. So no, I don't think it's a make or break moment, but I think it is a moment of clarity for ASEAN. For that to be happening in an ASEAN country is a real tragedy. And so I think all of us can do more. I'd like to see all of us doing more.
Thank you. Dr. Shah, so we are aware that tensions have cross-strait tensions have been somewhat it has been tense, let's say. And this, of course, ASEAN, I think, at least some of us in the back of our minds are thinking that we want to avoid something like, the Ukraine-Russia war from happening in our own backyard. What do you think, how would you say is the Chinese stance on this? Is this something the Chinese government would be, kind of intent on avoiding as well next year, considering the current situation?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of people would ask the same question as you raised. First of all, I would say that Beijing's policy towards Taiwan, or the cross-strait relationship, if you read the 20-party Congress report, it's being very clear that it's the peaceful reunification and also integrated development between the two sides across the strait. So all those military means or military maneuvers, it's to deter the so-called Taiwan independence forces. So that's the basic logic of Chinese mainland policy. And I would say that U.S. House Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, we know that ASEAN countries, most of the ASEAN member countries, they support One China principle, and they criticize Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. It's that very irresponsible to raise the tension across the strait and the whole region. So I think China really appreciates that this kind of a policy and attitudes by ASEAN member countries, and I think it's a kind of a wrong comparison between Ukrainian Russia conflict and the cross-strait relations. So it's totally a kind of a fake issue to say that Beijing will attack or will invade Taiwan next year or 2027 or 2035. All those things are ridiculous. No serious analysts or policymakers would think that in the next 5 years, those military conflict will happen in the Taiwan Strait. And also, I think it's a kind of a dangerous saying that some people try to learn the lesson from Russia-Ukraine conflict, that we should strengthen its deterrence to Beijing in order to prevent a kind of invasion to Taiwan. It's totally a wrong thinking. Those people don't understand the history of the cross-strait relations and also the Chinese mainland's policy towards Taiwan. So I would say, since the Taiwan issue has become a kind of a hot topic in Washington, D.C. and in some other capitals in those European countries, a lot of the so-called experts have joined into the policy debates, try to offer their opinion. They're very emotional, but they don't understand the Chinese policy, and they give a lot of policy recommendations, but actually most of them are quite dangerous. So I would say that I think Beijing is very confident about its policy towards Taiwan, and the peaceful reunification is in the interest of those people both in the mainland and in Taiwan. Yeah, I will stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. I think it's actually, the time has come to kind of open this forum up to questions from the audience. So I would like to invite all attendees to join. And if they have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll send over a microphone to you. Anyone? Lady.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Mashtudi, the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I have a question to the Indonesian participants about the rationale behind inviting or accepting the presence of Putin during the summit. Just a short question.
Would you like to take that on, Roger?
I think it's quite clear. First of all, Indonesia did not want to be dictated by certain pressures. It is going to be very difficult for Indonesia in the international forum, as well as President Jokowi, if it has to bow to the certain pressures, and Indonesia would not take that directions. But again, Indonesia is also would like to keep G20 as a economic forum. In my opinion, this is also a good way to keep the discussion going, and Indonesia basically is quite successful to keep the G20 intact. If Indonesia from the first times already set side or take side, then I think we have a chance to see this G20 breaking up. And so I think for Indonesia, this is a really good big achievement to keep the G20 intact, and then for I think this the first priority for Indonesia is now to keep the discussion going and to continue the discussions, or to continue the agenda in the next G20 presidency of India and perhaps several other developing countries, because this is a really good chance. This is good momentum for developing countries, basically, to amplify the Southern voice. And G20 is actually the only platforms that those developing countries have at the moment. So keeping it intact, it's already a good achievement.
Any comments from our other panels, perhaps? If I would like to tag on, I think you say developing countries stand to, win the most and lose the most if international cooperation collapses, right? So the G20 is important in that sense. What do you think, Dr. Fulilov? Are the stakes high or low enough for, let's say, these international conflicts to kind of overshadow the developing countries' interests in that sense?
Well, I think I talked about this earlier. I mean, I condemn the Russian state's actions in Ukraine, and I would like to see. And I've been surprised, actually, and heartened by the number of countries, including many countries in our region and many unexpected countries, who have stood up for the principles of state sovereignty and territorial integrity, which I know have been at the center of many countries' foreign policies for many years. And I would like to see more of that, frankly. I mean, I would like to see more countries in our part of the world stand up, not as a result of pressure. I think that's wrong, not because of the US telling countries to do something, but because if we normalize a situation where a powerful country can invade its neighbor, which is a sovereign state and a member of the United Nations, then the international order is finished. If we normalize a situation now where a nuclear weapon state can use nuclear blackmail and can achieve gains on the battlefield by threatening the use of nuclear weapons, then the world that we have lived in is finished. So I think the stakes are enormously high, and I would like to see, like I said, I would like to see countries that have put territorial integrity and state sovereignty at the heart of their foreign policy for decades. I would like to see them taking a consistent line on it. Now, having said that, I also think that international cooperation is important. I also think that the G20 is a rare forum. It represents 2/3 of the world's population, 5/6 of world output, I think 6 nuclear weapon states, it matters, and Australians are joiners by instinct, I would say, and we played a small role along with other countries in standing up the G20 and then elevating it to the leaders level. So I take Pak Yose's point, which is that notwithstanding the black and white moral issues in Ukraine, they're not the only black and white moral issues in the world. Food security is another. Putting rice on the table for developing countries is a hugely important issue. Dealing with the climate crisis, which is an existential threat to all of us. These are also important issues. So I agree with Pak Yose, and that's why I say that the G20 feels fragile, and it's right not to break it, even when the moral issues are as stark and as black and white as they are in Ukraine. And that's why I think Pak Yose is right that to de-invite certain leaders might have been the end of G20. And would that have been a good outcome? No. And that's why I said I'm pleased that the Australian government, notwithstanding Mr. Albanese's extreme discomfort, I'm sure, being in the same room or even being on a same video conference with Mr. Putin, said, no, we acknowledge Indonesia's leadership of the G20. We think it's important. And he said that he, as Prime Minister, will be there. So international politics is difficult, as you know, Pak Tama, and often you're holding different things in different hands and you have to juggle things and keep them all up in the air. But to me, the moral issue in Ukraine is clear, but it's not the only moral issue in the world. And we do need to keep forums in which leaders top leaders and foreign ministers and others can address these big international issues.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, in the middle.
Saying that religion and this very series of developing what do you think will be the key takeaway for the subsequent president in terms of agenda that we hope will be sustained in the next Congress? Thank you.
Thank you, Belina. Yes.
I'd like also to re-emphasize the importance of keeping G20 together. Now, we don't have any global suffering that is working. The WTO is basically despite the success of the last period. We know the problem within the Bretton Woods institution. The ability to adjust to new reality. The mechanism of G20, Bretton Woods institution remains basically the same as it was started, despite the very marketing changes in the global economy. So keeping the G20 alive, I think, is important. It is not going to be unclear for the problems that we are dealing with. But what else do we have right now? To Lina's question, as I said in my earlier question, when it comes to issues, we have very fundamental issues we move us right now, which are not going to be solved in 1, 2, 3, or 5 years. Remember, all governments have made statements on net zero emission. It will take them to get to them. As they very. So the energy transition is not going to be completed within 1 decade. It takes a lot of time. So I foresee the agenda in India, in Brazil, in South Africa, I'm not going to differ a great deal from the agenda that we have in Jakarta. But of course, we'd like to draw attention to issues that are of particular importance to developing now. That is important. With rising interest rate, we are going to see many countries having trouble to serve their external debt. A number of them have already been in technical bankruptcy. The G20 has this common framework, but it's open to improvement to allow that reduction. Right now, it's not possible, and I think China is of great importance to them. So that issue will remain important, particularly important to developing now. But also, it is by consistently saying any occasion that I can do cooperation in science. Look at Indonesia. We are known as a country with a very high propensity to engage in social media. Smartphone penetration in Indonesia is very high, but all these things are important. The next stage would be to promote cooperation in allowing Indonesia to also acquire certain competencies in the manufacturing. On this, I think ASEAN is a promising area. If I may have 1 or 2 minutes, ASEAN is going to be the fastest growing source of growth for the world. Fastest growth. In absolute terms, it will continue to be the developed economies in China. But in terms of growth, ASEAN is going to be playing a very important role. But to be able to realize the potential of ASEAN needs reform, ASEAN needs new leadership, ASEAN needs reform machinery, and Indonesia has the opportunity to do that next year. I'd like to see in ASEAN, for instance, a second review of the charter. We have been told all the time about ASEAN centrality. My question to ask is this: do we really consider ASEAN of central importance domestically? I have my friend Nguyen here from Vietnam. How do we make ASEAN of central importance domestically? It's a great challenge, and hope Indonesia can do something about it next year.
Thank you, Professor. I would actually like to add on to that question. You do mention that ASEAN, Indonesia has a oversized interest in ASEAN and how it plays or how it sets up this whole centrality equation in the region. And in that, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook is a very central document, I think, that ASEAN has been working on. So to the panelists here, perhaps Dr. Shao can help. What is enough being done on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific to warrant this inclusive regional engagement, and by extension, what Professor Jisman said was this, this centrality at the domestic level. Yeah.
It's interesting that here among this community that you are talking about the domestic thinking of ASEAN centrality. And I think because for so many years, ASEAN has been a kind of a mechanism that it's consensus based. So it's not like EU, and institutionally, these two are very different. So I don't know very much about the reforms of ASEAN, but I think ASEAN centrality really faces challenges both from within and outside. So here, the member countries should think about the challenges from within. And China as a regional country, I think China has trying to help ASEAN to strengthen the centrality of this mechanism. And it's interesting, I looked at the news that our state councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with ASEAN envoys in China on the 26th, immediately after the conclusion of the Party Congress. And that meeting was before his phone meeting was Russian foreign minister, and his meeting was US ambassador towards China. So actually that shows, I think, China pays a lot of attention to our relation with ASEAN, especially at the time that ASEAN faces a lot of external challenges. And last year, China has developed a comprehensive strategic partnership with ASEAN. And that facilitates the outside dynamics of ASEAN. And I think other regional countries are trying to also develop this kind of a comprehensive strategic relation with ASEAN. I hope all these things will improve the outside environment for ASEAN. And but the challenges are still huge, I would say. But as the colleagues discussed yesterday and also today, there have been ups and downs for so many years. So we have confidence in ASEAN. It would deal with all those challenges.
Thank you.
ASEAN is not only it's quite successful in reaching the interests of other countries, especially big powers in these regions. Like for example, even in economic front, the RCEP basically it's bridging between different countries, different economies in the regions that have the trade agreements, and ASEAN is really good at it. Maybe some would see it as weakness because ASEAN is just being used by others, for example. But I see this is also one of the advantages that ASEAN needs to capitalize in the future. So what I would like to suggest for ASEAN in the future, including also during the Indonesia chairmanship, is to take this opportunity to engage more with other countries in the regions. Like for example, in the economic front, there are many initiatives that cannot be done or implemented successfully under ASEAN can be taken up to the ASEAN +3 mechanism, for example, and it has been quite successful in the past. Like for example, the RCEP or Chiang Mai initiative, for example, and other ASEAN +3 initiative, then it might also be advantageous for ASEAN to take up the political and security areas to the larger communities or the largest countries in the region.
Okay, I sense that perhaps like coming back to my original question about the Indo-Pacific, it seems that you're suggesting that there are already existing mechanisms in place that are just as effective, if not, the preferred mechanisms of choice.
Yes, but unfortunately, the Indo-Pacific idea or outlook is not really taken up within ASEAN itself, and other countries or other countries in the regions do not really see it as an alternative. Unlike RCEP, for example, so at that time, RCEP was seen by other countries in this region as an alternative than the proposal from China or proposal from Japan or proposal from other countries during Indonesia's chairmanship in 2011. So how to make that Indo-Pacific outlook from ASEAN can be seen as an alternative, a meaningful alternative from others. Then that's really a difficult task for ASEAN, but they have to find a good way to convince others as well. But first of all, to convince among ASEAN itself.
Fair enough. I think the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is something that has to, by definition, also attract the attention of its dialogue partner. So I would like to ask Dr. Fulilov here, the Australian, I think, stance is the Australian government has an Indo-Pacific strategy in that sense, right? So how much of it is actually overlapping? How much of what ASEAN is doing is, helpful to the interests of Australia and perhaps other dialogue partners?
Australia's been a long-standing supporter of ASEAN. I think we became a dialogue partner nearly 50 years ago. We became a strategic partner in 2014, and we signed a.
Sorry, I will start again this time. No, I mean, Australia has been a long-standing supporter, I think, at the forefront of outside countries engaging with ASEAN. We became a dialogue partner nearly 50 years ago in 1974. We've been strategic partners since 2014, and I think we signed comprehensive strategic partnership last year, if I'm correct. So I think Australia is very respectful of ASEAN centrality, very much so. That doesn't mean that from time to time Australia won't do things with other groupings, other organizations, and obviously we're a member of the Quad at the moment. But I think Australia feels that it can do both things at once. It can respect ASEAN centrality, but at the same time, if it finds commonalities of interest with other countries where we can add we can add some public goods to the mix through our membership of the Quad, then we're happy to do so. But I think our runs are on the board in relation to ASEAN centrality.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions from the? Yeah, perhaps yes. On the front. Oh, actually, yeah, we'll give you the mic first. Thank you. So just you got the question that was about potential meeting.
Yeah, I got it. Look, first of all, I should say I don't have any information about whether a meeting would take place in Bali or not. I'm simply making a broader observation that after 3 years of being in Beijing's diplomatic deep freeze, Beijing is turning the temperature up a little bit. And we've had a meeting of defense ministers at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which I attended. There have been, I think, 2 meetings of the foreign ministers. So the next logical step would be a meeting between the leaders. Whether it will take place then, whether it will take place this year or next year, I don't know. And I wouldn't want anybody to be misled into thinking that I have inside knowledge that I don't have. Should the Australian Prime Minister meet with the Chinese President? Absolutely, for the reasons that I've said earlier, that even when there is disagreement, and in fact, particularly when there is disagreement, it's important for top leaders to communicate. I don't want to relitigate the past, because your question is about the future, but I think the truth is that Australian Prime Ministers have been willing to speak to President Xi over the last 3 years. So I think that's important to state. How would I counsel Mr. Albanese, who has proven, I must say, to be very deft in his first few months on the international stage, so probably doesn't need my counsel at all. He's not calling me on the phone, let's put it that way. But look, I would say that Australia's relations with China are important. China is our most important economic partner, and it's our largest trading partner, and it is increasingly changing the weather in Asia. And Pak Yose smiled, I think, when I said that. We all need to have a positive, stable, productive relationship with China. That's in our interest. It's also in China's interest to have a stable, productive, positive relationship with Australia. Australia is a contributor to international security. Australia is a large economy. Australia is a provider of many of the resources that China needs to power its growth at a time when, because of what's happening in Ukraine, it's, the premium on reliable producers of commodities and energy is extremely important. So it's in both our countries' interests to speak and to have a stable and productive relationship. I think I would say to him that Australia and China should cooperate when we can. We should look for other dimensions in which we can cooperate. We should disagree when we must. There will be a lot of occasions when we disagree. We've disagreed a lot in the last 3 years with the trade barriers that have been applied to our products. So when we have to disagree, we have to disagree. But thirdly, we can do it in a respectful way while always standing our ground. I think that's important. Respect to the other partner is always important. Respect for yourself is important. So that would be my advice to Prime Minister Albanese. Let's cooperate when we can, disagree when we must, always stand our ground. Thank you.
I would actually be interested to know what Dr. Shah would say to that as well.
China-Australia relation, I agree with Dr. Fullalove. It's a very important bilateral relationship for China and for Australia. And I think China tries to improve its bilateral relationship with Australia. It's in our own interests, but also we should adhere to the principle, and also do it in a respectful way. I agree with that. And also, I think Australia is a very important regional country, and it's one of U.S. bilateral allies. So all these identities, put them together, I think it makes a little bit difficult for China. It's a kind of a challenge for China to deal with Australia, right? How to deal with all those differences and on various occasions, some differences from Chinese perspective are directly related to China-US relations. So all these things, if we put them together, sometimes it will make the improvement of our bilateral relationship a little bit difficult. But anyway, it's good to know that the two governments are committed to the improvement of this bilateral relationship. And also after our visit to Jakarta, our delegation will go to Australia. And it's also a kind of a small step try to improve the bilateral relationship between our two countries. We try to have this kind of people-to-people exchanges and think tank exchanges, try to send the messages from both Sydney and Jakarta back to Beijing and Shanghai to let the Chinese government know. And also we try to get in touch with the parliament members in Australia and to have the voices from the civil society and also from the parliament in order to have a full or comprehensive picture of Australians' attitude towards China, towards the Chinese government, and also the policy community. So that's our commitment and endeavor. We hope we can make a little bit contribution to this bilateral relationship. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Any more questions from the crowd? Yes, the gentleman in the front here. We have about time for two more, so if you would like
Well,
to.
I'd like to have a question to Michael and to Shao. What are your hopes or expectations on ASEAN that best fits your country's interest in Indonesia's chairmanship year? And I have a question to Pak Yose and Pak Jisman also. What are your hopes and expectations on partner countries of ASEAN? What would they do that best fits ASEAN's interest on your chairmanship year? Thank you.
First?
It's a good question. Thank you. And I think for China, the next year, Indonesia's chairmanship, I would say, first of all, China's relation with ASEAN, because ASEAN is our biggest trade partner. And also, as I said, last year, we have developed this comprehensive strategic partnership. Of course, the framework is there, and we have to implement all those policy papers, try to make them become real. So in order to make this bilateral relationship more fruitful and so that the Chinese government also can talk to the domestic audience, right? Why we have to develop a very good relationship with ASEAN. This is the first thing. The second is that about the regional security architecture and also economic governance architecture. We have so many mechanisms in this region, a kind of a proliferation now. But as I said, ASEAN centrality has been shaken a little bit. So how to balance ASEAN centrality and also other, like those mini-lateralism in the so-called Indo-Pacific framework. Because from Chinese perspective, that the Indo-Pacific strategy adopted by the US government certainly is a kind of an anti-China strategy. Because in the context of the competition strategy adopted by the Biden administration towards China, it's very hard, at least to convince me, that the whole Indo-Pacific strategy is not to limit China's influence or not to contain China. So I think it's unfair because China has been punished for the present capability and for the future potential. So I know it put ASEAN in a very difficult situation, try to balance all those major powers. But I personally, I think the Chinese government has a lot of confidence in Indonesia's chairship in this in next year for ASEAN. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Jisman, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I expect a lot from our partners. Number one, probably, at least economically speaking, ASEAN is not an optimal region. ASEAN +3 is. And if you wish to extend, then ASEAN +6, but unfortunately, India opted to stay out of ASEAN. So, building regionalism in our part of the world is important. ASEAN can serve as kind of catalyst, but I think in the end, the region of our region is East Asia rather than Southeast Asia. That's number one. And I hope that China will look at it that way too, dealing with each of us in ASEAN in a regional way, rather than in a bilateral way. And the same applies both to Australia and our external partners, Japan and Korea. Number two, I wish to see agreement among us, East Asia, on science and technology cooperation and sharing, going to the sources of growth, rather than limiting our attention to what is already in the European Union as well. And number three, this is my last list. I wish that our leaders find it important to agree on East Asia education area. East Asia education area. Traffic of students among us is very easy. Internationally mobile students are also very easy. Our major destination within our region is Australia, but I wish to see the reverse flow to happen. So once again, East Asia education area, of course, we need decades for X to put it in place, but at least the idea would be loans in the Northeast.
Would you like to add anything, Jose, or any comments from our other panelists, perhaps?
Yes, I agree totally with Gisman's that ASEAN is not optimal regions. ASEAN has convening powers, really effective convening powers, but ASEAN do not really have enough resources. That's why many actually initiatives can be more effective. It can be brought up to regional agendas rather than ASEAN agenda alone, because many common goods, international public goods that we need in these regions basically also has a big economies of scale, especially when we're talking about the energy transitions or climate adaptations, and also dealing with the cross-border data flow. Those are all the issues that need to be dealt at the regional levels, not only at Southeast Asia. And I also would like to emphasize what Gisman mentions, that partners perhaps also need to start and need to think more seriously ASEAN as an entity rather than doing the relations only bilaterally. It's been well. I think so. To have more attitudes of the partners towards ASEAN in more cohesive or cohesive way. Yeah, thank you.
Great. We have one. Please go ahead.
First of all, let me say I welcome what Dr. Shah was saying earlier about the efforts that she and Dr. Chen are making at the margins in a small way to improve bilateral relations. I think that's a great initiative. So thank you for that. I will say she won't be surprised that I disagree with her characterization of US policy in Asia. I'm not an American, I'm an Australian. Australia has lots of differences with the United States, but I am an analyst of the United States. And I don't really see it as containment. I know that Chinese interlocutors disagree with that, but I think China is way too significant to be contained. I think it's about competition, which I know China engages in, and I think it's about balance. And I actually think most Asian states welcome the idea of a balance of forces in Asia. I think it's just a sort of a natural part of how nature operates, that a balance of forces creates more space for smaller countries to find their own way. And when one large country dominates a region completely, then it's harder for the rest of us to choose the way we go, to exercise our agency. None of us want to live in the shadow of one big country. And so, although it's not for me to say what other Asian states say, when I talk privately to Asian interlocutors, most of them want a US that is engaged in the region and competing, but not in conflict, of course, with China, because none of us want conflict in this region. Would be very dangerous, but a healthy sense of competition and balance, I think, is positive. Anyway, that's my view as an analyst. On ASEAN, on the question from my colleague, Dr. Nguyen, I think that I think the best case for Australia is an ASEAN that maintains its vibrancy, that hangs together, which is difficult because of the diversity of ASEAN countries, but at the same time addresses difficult issues when there is a crisis within your own region, as I believe there is in Myanmar. I would say that I really liked the way the Prof referred to reversing the flows. And I think that's a really positive thing. And that's something that I think Australia needs to work harder on. I think under the previous government was very focused on distant partners like the United States and Quad partners and our immediate region, the Pacific. But between there, in Southeast Asia, I think we lost our focus a little bit. Not out of a lack of goodwill, but with everything else happening in COVID, we lost a bit of our focus on Southeast Asia. And I know the new government is correcting that, doing everything it can to correct that. I see the Foreign Minister was meeting with the Sultan of Brunei yesterday. So I think the more that Australia can demonstrate its bona fides, including by sending our people into the region, our young people into the region to learn from Indonesians and other Southeast Asians, I think the better. The last thing that I would say in terms of, I know we're running out of time, but the last thing I would say is a best case would be to see deft chairmanship by Indonesia in the next year, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we believe in Indonesia as a regional leader and as a global leader. We believe in the idea of an outward-looking Indonesia that wants to engage in the world and wants to contribute to international cooperation. So, we're willing you on.
On that note, we have run out of time. So I thank our speakers, esteemed speakers, for today's meeting and for today's discussion. And our co-organizers, the CSIS and CFR. This has been the Council of Councils 13th Regional Conference. It's quite a mouthful. But thank you so much for everyone who has come today and we'll close the session now. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you for your efforts, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the speakers for their insightful presentations and engaging discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the public session. It has been a very productive and compact session. Please join me in giving another round of applause to our panelists. And I would like to sincerely thank you for the participations, both offline and online. We sincerely hope that what we've discussed today would do its part in promoting a successful summits and chairmanship. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much and good day. Thank you.